Here's something most gold holders don't know yet. In the last 72 hours, two separate events hit the market, completely unrelated to each other, and both of them point in the exact same direction for precious metals. I'm not talking about noise. I'm talking about a Supreme Court ruling that rewrote American trade law overnight and a 10-day military ultimatum to Iran backed by the largest aircraft carrier on Earth. But here's the part that stopped me cold right before I hit record. A Bloomberg headline just dropped saying the US accepted Iran's demand to keep enriching uranium. Peace deal incoming. Gold should sell off, right? I clicked the source, and what I found tells you everything about how markets actually work and who's really pulling the strings on price right now. Stay with me because by the end of this video, you're going to see exactly what happened, why the mainstream coverage missed the real story, and what the smart money is quietly doing while everyone else reads the headline. Let's start with the tariffs, because what happened here has never, and I mean never, happened before in American history. The Supreme Court of the United States just ruled 6-3 that Trump's tariffs were unconstitutional. The law he used, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, does not give any president the authority to impose import taxes. 6 justices agreed. Done. Now, here's where most people stopped paying attention, and that's exactly the mistake. Because within hours of that ruling, Trump walked out, called it deeply disappointing, said he was ashamed of 2 justices he personally nominated, and then signed a brand new 10% global tariff under a completely different law that nobody has used in 52 years, Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. Think about what just happened. He lost in the highest court in the country. And by the next morning, he'd maxed out a legal backup that's been sitting dormant since 1974. That's not a defeat. That's an escalation in a different uniform. And here's what makes this dangerous for anyone trying to plan around trade policy. Section 122 has a hard ceiling of 15% and expires in 150 days unless Congress votes to extend it. Trump signed 10% on Friday night. Saturday morning, he raised it to 15% on social media, the legal maximum, in under 24 hours. So the tariffs didn't disappear. They just changed form. Before the ruling, effective tariff rates were around 16%, the highest since 1936. After Trump's response, they dropped to roughly 7 to 15% depending on the country. China went from 45% to 35%. The EU stayed at 15%. For most of the world's major economies, the practical impact on the ground was far smaller than the headline suggested. But here's the number I want you to sit with for a moment. Because the court ruled the original tariffs were illegal, every importer who paid them in 2025 and 2026 may be entitled to a refund. The estimates, $175 billion. That money has to come from somewhere. That somewhere is a treasury already running a $2 trillion annual deficit. $175 billion in refunds. $2 trillion more in debt every year. That's not a fiscal policy. That's a math problem. And gold is very comfortable in a world full of math problems. But the number isn't even the real story. The real story is what this ruling did to uncertainty, because that's what actually moves gold. Before the Supreme Court decision, there was one tariff regime. It was high, but companies knew what they were dealing with. Now there's a 150-day clock ticking. Nobody knows if Congress extends it. Nobody knows if courts strike down Section 122 the same way they struck down IEEPA. Nobody knows what happens when the clock runs out. Put yourself in the chair of a central bank reserve manager right now. You have no idea what US trade policy looks like 5 months from now. You can't plan, you can't hedge, you can't budget with confidence. So what do? You buy gold. Because gold doesn't have a tariff policy. Gold doesn't expire in 150 days. Gold doesn't need a congressional vote to hold its value. And that's not theory, that's exactly what central banks have been doing. Record purchases 3 years straight, over 2,500 tons a year. And this week gave them more reason to accelerate. The market understood this instantly. The day of the ruling, gold was already above $5,000. It pushed higher, not because tariffs went away, but because the situation got more complicated. The market looked at the ruling and Trump's same-day response and reached one conclusion. This isn't a resolution. This is an escalation. Gold responds to escalation. And here's a comparison I keep coming back to because I've been tracking the Dow-Gold ratio across my last several videos, and this week made it stronger, not weaker. The last time this ratio sat at its current level was 1973, right before gold went from $180 to $850. Everything that happened this week is consistent with that trajectory. I'm not saying history repeats exactly, but when the same ratio appears in the same kind of systemic uncertainty, it's worth paying attention. Silver responds to this environment too, but with an extra layer. Silver is both a safe haven metal and an industrial one. Solar panels, electric vehicles, medical equipment, defense systems. Every one of those industries is dealing with tariff whiplash right now. Every one of them needs silver. And there's one specific detail buried in this ruling that almost nobody caught, and it changes the silver story significantly. I'll get to that shortly. But first, the second event. Because while this was playing out in Washington, something potentially more dangerous was happening 6,000 miles away. Trump gave Iran a 10 to 15-day deadline, reach a nuclear deal or face consequences. When asked what consequences meant, he pointed to the U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities last June. This is not posturing. There are two carrier strike groups in the region right now. The USS Gerald R. Ford, the largest aircraft carrier in the world, just entered the Mediterranean heading toward the Gulf. This is the biggest American military buildup in the Middle East since the actual strikes last June, and there's a countdown clock running on top of all of it. Now, the diplomatic signals have been more constructive than expected. Iran's foreign minister said a deal is achievable. He said talks in Geneva produced agreed guiding principles. Iran would present a written draft within 2 to 3 days. That's a completely different posture from 3 months ago when Iran refused to even sit at the table. And that brings me back to that Bloomberg headline. The US accepted Iran's demand to maintain uranium enrichment. Here's what I want you to notice, not what the headline says, but when it was published and where it came from. This story hit the wire on a weekend. Markets closed. Gold above $5,100. Silver above $84. The only source. ISNA, the Iranian Students' News Agency, semi-official Iranian state media, not a US official, not the White House, not the State Department. An unnamed Iranian diplomat quoted by Iranian media. Now ask yourself the question that Wall Street asks before every major trade. Who benefits from this story existing right now? If you're short precious metals, or if you want to accumulate at a discount before the next leg higher, a weekend piece rumor is exactly what you need. It hits Sunday night, metals pull back Monday open, you load up cheaper, the story gets quietly walked back 48 hours later, and the rally resumes. We saw this exact playbook during the tariff negotiations, unnamed source stories from one side, time to move markets. This feels like the same thing. Iran using their own media to signal progress, soften the war premium, and strengthen their hand at the negotiating table. The actual substance of the talks? Both sides are still working through technical limits, centrifuge counts, enrichment levels, facility locations. That's not a deal. That's the beginning of a conversation that could take months. And while that conversation happens, the 10-day deadline is still ticking. The carriers are still in the Gulf. So read the fine print on every headline right now. Ask yourself who benefits, and then look at what the actual sticking point is, because it's not the nuclear program. It's missiles. Iran has signaled it might accept nuclear limits and could dilute its highly enriched uranium. But the ballistic missile program is a hard red line. Israel is demanding those missiles be completely dismantled. The US wants them constrained at minimum. Here's why this matters for Iran. Giving up its missile program is giving up its ability to deter the exact kind of strikes that happened last June. No government voluntarily disarms like that. For Israel, Iranian missiles can reach Tel Aviv in under 12 minutes. This isn't about diplomacy, it's about survival calculus on both sides. Both positions are non-negotiable, and the US is trying to broker a compromise that may not mathematically exist. So let's walk through the 3 scenarios because each one affects gold and silver differently, and knowing which is most likely is the difference between panic selling a dip and loading up on one. Scenario 1, a deal gets done. Iran accepts nuclear limits, missiles get deferred, sanctions ease, the military buildup winds down. Short term, the fear premium in metals comes off. Expect a 3 to 5% pullback, not a crash. Silver likely dips more than gold as the safe haven bid weakens temporarily. But here's the critical point. Even in a deal scenario, the tariff chaos is still running. The 150-day clock is still ticking. The $2 trillion deficit hasn't moved. Any dip from an Iran deal is shallow and temporary, a buying opportunity, not a reversal. Scenario 2, talks collapse and strikes follow. The deadline passes, Trump orders limited strikes on Iranian military or nuclear targets. Gold goes vertical, $5,300, $5,500, possibly higher within days. Silver follows with more volatility. Oil spikes. The dollar initially strengthens as a safe haven, then weakens as the fiscal cost of another military engagement becomes clear. I'll be direct about something here. A lot of people watching this are quietly hoping for this outcome because their portfolio benefits enormously. I understand that math, But strikes mean people die, countries destabilize, and supply chains break in ways that take years to repair. I'd rather gold reach $5,500 through monetary policy than through bombs. The market doesn't price my preferences, it prices reality. But I wanted to say it out loud anyway. Scenario 3, and this is the one I think actually plays out. No deal, no strike, just tension. The deadline passes, both sides keep talking, the military buildup stays in place as leverage, and Trump quietly moves the goalposts. He set aggressive deadlines and then extended them with China on trade. He did the same with North Korea on nukes. He's running the same pattern with Iran. The 10-day deadline is leverage, not a launch order. The carriers are there to make the threat credible, not to start a war. And here's the irony. Scenario 3 may be the best one for gold and silver over the medium term. No resolution means no reason to sell your metals. The uncertainty premium gets permanently embedded in the price. Gold doesn't spike dramatically, it just grinds higher week after week while the fear sits quietly underneath every trade. Up, flat, up, flat, up. Every unresolved headline is another step on the staircase. Now let me show you why right now is different from anything I've covered before, because this is the part most analysts are getting wrong. Usually markets get one catalyst at a time, a tariff announcement, an inflation print, a central bank decision. One thing moves markets, markets digest it, the next thing comes. What's happening right now is different. Multiple catalysts are stacking faster than markets can absorb them. Supreme Court ruling Thursday night, new tariff Friday night, raised to the legal maximum Saturday morning. Iran deadline running the entire time in the background. Gold and silver don't even have time to consolidate before the next headline lands. That kind of environment doesn't produce clean pullbacks. It produces staircase rallies. And when you look at both crises together, not separately, something else becomes clear. When was the last time the US faced a constitutional crisis over trade policy and a military standoff with a nuclear threshold state at the same time? I can't find one. And gold above $5,100 isn't a panic price. It's a price that says the market sees exactly what I'm describing and is quietly positioning for more. There's one more angle nobody is talking about. The Supreme Court ruling didn't just affect tariffs, it affected confidence in the dollar system itself. Think about this from the perspective of a finance minister in Tokyo, Berlin, or Brasilia. You spent the last year restructuring your trade flows around American tariff policy. You signed deals, you moved supply chains, you adjusted prices, and then one court ruling wipes out the entire legal framework overnight. The next morning, a replacement appears under a different law with a 5-month expiration date. What does that do to your confidence in the stability of the American economic system? What does it do to your confidence in the dollar as a reserve currency? This is why central banks are buying gold, not because of any single event, but because the system itself is becoming less predictable. The rules change overnight. The executive and judiciary are publicly fighting over trade policy in real time. Gold has no Supreme Court. Gold has no Section 122. Gold doesn't expire in 150 days. Now, that silver detail I promised you, because this one got buried and almost nobody is talking about it. The Section 122 tariffs specifically exempt critical minerals. Silver is on the US critical minerals list. That means silver imports are not subject to the new 15% tariff. Let that sink in. Every other industrial input just got more expensive. Silver didn't. That gives silver a relative cost advantage in manufacturing, which increases demand relative to substitutes, which makes an already severe supply deficit even worse. Silver has been in a supply deficit for 5 consecutive years. Physical delivery is already under extreme stress. Refineries backed up, mints closed to new orders, COMEX vaults draining. That was before this ruling, before the Iran deadline. Add these two catalysts on top of an already stretched physical market, and the asymmetry becomes very clear. And the gold-silver ratio confirms the move is already underway. When gold was at $5,000 and silver at $77 a few weeks ago, the ratio was 65. Today, gold above $5,100, silver above $84, the ratio has compressed to about 60. 5 points in a matter of weeks. The framework I covered in the Tavi Costa video on this channel suggests this ratio could reach 25 to 30 over the next several years, which implies silver at multiples of where it trades today. We've already moved 5 points in weeks. The market is starting to agree with the thesis. Goldman Sachs just reiterated a $5,400 gold target by end of 2026. Personally, I think that's conservative. Here's where everything stands right now. The court didn't fix the tariff problem, it made it more complicated. Trump didn't back down, he escalated with a different legal tool. Iran didn't surrender, they're negotiating under military threat with carriers off their coast. None of this is resolution, all of it is fuel. Two stories, both escalating, both pointing the same direction. A market pricing it in gradually, not in a panic, which tells me the move has significant room left to run. And underneath all of it, $36 trillion in debt, $2 trillion added every year, central banks buying gold at record pace, and a physical silver market under stress that existed before any of this week's headlines. The system is under pressure because the math doesn't work anymore, and when something finally gives, the people holding gold and silver are going to be very glad they did. Drop a comment and tell me which scenario you think plays out, deal, strikes, or muddle through. And do you think the tariff chaos is more bullish for gold than the Iran situation? I want both sides of that argument. If you haven't seen the Silver Short Squeeze video or the Tavi Costa Framework video on this channel, go watch those next. The Short Squeeze video explains what's happening in the physical market right now. The Tavi Costa video explains the long-term math behind why I think silver could go 5 to 10 times from here. Together with this one, they form the complete picture, short-term catalysts, medium-term dynamics, and the long-term thesis. Stay sharp, stay stacking.